everybody. It's Melissa Killeleagh. We're here in studio at Finger Lakes One TV, thanks to our wonderful host, Jim Sinacropi, and our producer today, Zach Cornett. It's June 26th, and we're in studio with a couple of really incredible guests and a story of serendipity unfolding once again. So I'll tell you that in just a moment. But before I do, I want to tell you a little bit about me. So for those of you who don't know me, again, my name is Melissa Killeleagh, and I am a local resident in Seneca Falls, sharing all things Finger Lakes and beyond. This podcast was born a little after my son was 2 years ago, in the effort to bring more inspiring news to the world around us because of all the incredible things going on here in the Finger Lakes and beyond. I love to think about our community being a little bit more global than just in our local area. So what I love to do for these podcasts is bring to you, a local woman who is making the world a better place, a man making a difference, all things out and about in the community, and then leave you with a little bit of ideas and inspiration to take with you on your journey and think about what we share with you today. And so today's guests are really special to my heart because the man who has made a difference in my life and in the greater global community is Tom Sinclair. He is the former director of Master of Public Administration program at Binghamton University, which is where we met. And what is so fun about the connection between him and our next guest, which is Rachel Weil, is that this weekend, as I was thinking about, who would be a great pair to have on board when we have this very interesting human being who is an incredible academic, but also really passionate about being involved in the local community? How do we have that infusion of academia and activism? And I was walking down Fall Street in downtown Seneca Falls and happened to bump into Rachel. So I'm so excited to bring the two of them here into the studio today. Again, on this show, I love to showcase people I believe to be our everyday heroes, doing work that really truly makes a tremendous difference out in the world. And so we're going to start with Rachel, our woman making the world a better place. Rachel, thank you so much for coming in the studio today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So for those of you who don't know her, Rachel is the founder of Indivisible Seneca Falls. She's going to tell us a little bit more about that and a little bit more about the background and education who brought her to her work.
Okay, well, let me start with Indivisible. It's a loose group of people in Seneca Falls in the area who are in turn connected to a loose movement. And I should say that we all got started after November 2016, when many people, including me, were devastated by the election of Donald Trump and very worried about the country. So I would say we are people who share that perspective. We're people who share a certain set of values. We care about the environment. We care about civil rights for women and people of color and LGBT and Muslims and immigrants. I think we all care about fairness and opportunity, things like everybody should have access to affordable health care. We care about keeping public education public, and a number of other issues. And what we do is I would say what I try to do is find pathways to action. Take people who are very concerned about issues and really want to change the direction of the country and give them something to do. And so the form our action takes is political engagement, primarily, and this is how it started, encouraging people to call their congressman, talk to their congressman, go to town halls with their congressman, make their views known. But it's expanded beyond that, not just to getting members of the group to engage with our congressman, but also to engage with other people to try to make more and more people in our community aware of what goes on in Washington and empowered to take action and informed about the issues. So there are a lot of different ways that we've done this over the past, year and a half that we've been in existence. We've written a lot of letters to the editor. We have put ads in the newspaper. We have held some rallies, often in connection with national movements. For example, when there was a March for Our Lives about gun safety in the wake of the Parkland shooting, we made sure that Seneca Falls had its own rally. And lately, we have been doing a project of voter engagement, which is why I wore this T-shirt. This is the message. This is primary day. We have been knocking on the doors of voters, letting them know that there's a bunch of primaries and general elections coming up, asking them some questions about how they see the issues and trying to build bridges so that we can come back and actually get more people voting in elections.
I love it.
So do I.
Yeah, incredible. So, Rachel, what brought you to this work?
You know, I think probably I was a person who really needed an outlet for action. After November, whatever it was, 2016, actually, it was my wife, my partner, who found me unbearable to live with after the election of Donald Trump because I kept walking around the house fulminating and being angry at everybody. And she suggested that I needed to find people who were more like me and who shared my views. And that actually resulted in a very small meeting at my house where she invited a lot of people that she knew but that I didn't know. And I found like-minded people, and I think one of the things that Indivisible, and that was sort of the germ of Indivisible, I think one of the things that the group does that's so important psychologically is it just lets people know that they're not alone. I have made wonderful friends. I think other people have made wonderful friends. People connect. I think we've made it possible to be visible in this town and in this county as a person engaged with politics and having certain progressive values. My background beyond that is I'm an academic. I guess that's why you've got me on the show. And so I've always been a scholar and a teacher and curious about issues. I don't think there's a direct connection between my academic work and what I do, except that I love finding things out and I love research. So to me, whether it's sitting in an archive and opening a bundle of documents that are going to show me something wonderful about the past, or whether it's knocking on the door of a total stranger and asking how they feel about what's going on in Washington, there's a kind of desire to find out and maybe a belief that the more people know, the more power they have. So I think that's one of the places that it all comes together for me.
I absolutely love that. And that last piece is that bit of empowerment, really, right?
Yeah.
It's giving people choice.
It is because, people don't know. People often don't know too much about politics and often feel like there would be something wrong if they did know. Like it's not a cool topic. It's not a topic for dinner table conversation.
Well, isn't that what we're often cultured with? We're told that religion and politics don't belong.
Don't belong at the dinner table, and I think that's one of the things we have to change. Now we have to work on changing it without screaming at people. I believe there needs
name calling.
Right. There needs to be a middle ground between calling people names on Facebook or occasionally at the dinner table, and just not talking at all about politics because it might be uncomfortable. And so I do believe that knowledge and communication and conversation have got to be good things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're gonna do our segments a little bit differently today and open this up for conversation, because something that you just said really stirred something for me. But before I share that, I just have to say, I would imagine that if I were one of those people whose door you were knocking on, that I would invite you in, because you have that friendly face, you have that sort of soft, caring spirit, even though the passion is deeper and you have a greater cause here, right? I think that would definitely open the door for me. And so I'm grateful that you're doing that work, because I think you can reach a lot of people, and that's so important. what you sparked for me is this idea of dialogue. And this takes me right back to finishing up my master's degree, working under the wings of Tom Sinclair, and having conversation so frequently about how this is an element that is missing. You know, it's you're thinking about the old town hall meeting, you know, kind of approach to getting people together and actually getting them to show up and have a conversation. And what I have found recently is I've been able to engage people more readily online. And it's no longer hiding behind the forums of, you know, Finger Lakes One, where you're just typing a thread and signing off with some anonymous title, right? It's literally getting people into some web rooms and having conversation over critical issues going on in society today. And I'm so grateful for that platform, because it is step by step, person by person, teaching us that we can have these conversations without yelling and without name calling, and that we actually can find common ground. And that's something, when I see your work with Indivisible and the connection, for example, to the Women March in Seneca Falls, same spirit. It's the ability to unite people over principles and common cause versus divide us by putting us on one side of the fence or the other. And so, Tom, I would love for you to just share a little bit about your background and weigh in on that, because this is a conversation that you and I have had many times, and I know it is a subject that's near and dear to your heart.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me, Melissa, and to both you and Rachel, thanks for working on the Women's March, because my wife and I attended that last year, and it was just an amazing day of fantastic energy and people coming together and doing something positive. And it was a wonderful few hours. And I think for my own experience, my own background, I've always been a student of little d democracy. And whether that was in growing up and being active in student government, or going to graduate school and learning about public policy and public administration, and how do these systems work? How do we make changes when we see problems that are challenging us? And I always felt very much that there's this tension, but also opportunity for collaboration between expertise and experience. And you know, in one field of public administration, there's a lot of expertise there. People who know their stuff, the bureaucrats, the policy experts, and sometimes there's not a lot of patience with the public among those folks, because they say, well, the public hasn't studied this issue. They don't know the things that we know. And on the other hand, the lived experience of people and the stories that they tell each other are as important and compelling, and often more of an impetus for change than all of that expertise. And so how do we find ways to bring those two approaches together? How do we have the public engage in policy issues in ways where their experience can help lead to better solutions? And how do we teach the public administrators and managers how to essentially be vulnerable to the challenge of responding to the public? And you know, I was just thinking about, as Rachel was talking, my first experience with politics was my first job, where I was working for a member of Congress. And back then, he was a liberal Democrat who represented a conservative Republican district. And so he had a nickname, Howard Bipartisan Wolpe, because everything he did was bipartisan. And but Howard always used to say to people, if you think you're powerless, you are. And that was probably the most formative lesson for me in politics, was to be able to think about how do we empower people so that they take control and command over their own democracy? And especially when there's so many pressures out there to keep the people uninvolved and disinterested, and to spread a myth that all politicians are corrupt and all politics is corrupt and the systems are corrupt and there's no hope for them. That's all by design, to get us to stand on the sidelines and let people do what they want to do.
Right.
So we have to find ways to engage and empower people, whether it's my students that I'm working with, or whether it's my role in a small town of Dryden to work with people who are trying to improve that community. And in doing those kinds of things, I think by focusing on our local experience and building our local networks, that's where we create resilient and powerful communities that will help us sustain ourselves and improve ourselves in what is really a dark time nationally in politics.
I can so appreciate that. And what it makes me think of is the idea of social capital, right? We're kind of rebuilding social capital.
Right.
And the reason why I think about that is the book that we read during our program, Bowling Alone, Robert Putnam.
Right.
And he talked a lot about how in that process of disengaging, when you also have social capital on the decline, it becomes a very scary place, right? Because then the machine is doing what the machine does, right? And nobody is engaging. And so it's so exciting to know that social capital is something that is desired and pursued daily. We're rebuilding it all over the place. We're seeing it happen across all kinds of borders because of the power of technology. We're seeing it happen in our own community with people like Rachel going door to door and having conversations. And it gives me so much hope in what we could consider, some dark times. Here's something I want to talk about, something I think is important for people to hear. So, our viewers, we come on to a program like this and we're here to share inspiration. We're here to share positivity. But I think what is so important to know is that, like, the people who are around us, who are out there doing great work and making things happen, don't have their own struggles and their own crises of conscience when it comes to what's going on in the world today. So I know, Tom, you and I just chatted in the parking lot over at Cafe 19 about my own crises just a few days ago. I was really still struggling over the death of a small child here in our area. But I had shared online a conversation with a couple of the Sheriff's Department investigators who I had the pleasure to have lunch with, Minnie Marquardt and Chris Felice. And they just gave me this very practical list of things I could do to really get my hands into the community in a way that would feel like it's possible for one person to make a difference. But I would love for you to share, because we connected over that same kind of thing. If you would share, one of those moments that you've had where, like, you have this reflection of what more can we do? How can we make a change? What can one person do? Because that was an inflection moment for you as well. If you'd share more.
I was thinking about your experience, and back in 2009, I had a close friend and colleague who was murdered in the mass shooting at Binghamton at the American Civic Association, and so ever since that day, I've been very involved in anti-gun violence, in thinking about how do we find solutions to this problem that over 19,000 people a year are murdered in the United States. Over 30,000 die by gunshot, a lot of them by suicide, and so there was a point, I think it was just after the Parkland shootings, where you see these shootings over and over again, and it becomes a real post-traumatic kind of experience, because you remember waiting and not knowing what had happened to your friend. And as the day drags on, you know that the news is going to be bad. And then the horrific aftermath, where an entire community is just so damaged. And how do people put themselves back together? And they vow that this will never happen again, and that it does, and you see it over and over in other communities. And I think it's a natural thing for people, even when they are very engaged in these kinds of issues, to reach a point sometimes where you just think, I just can't go on. I just can't write another letter, send another check, attend another meeting, because nothing seems to change. But that, again, that's a fallacy, and we see that over and over again in history, where there have been substantial changes that we wouldn't imagine happening until they do. The fall of the Iron Curtain. The rise of gay rights in the United States. I mean, we don't know when that inflection point comes, when there's a turning point. But we have to rely on people to help us get through those dark times.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I remember reading something after one of the shootings that a mother had written about how, sometimes the difference that we can make is simply like, asking that person who's sitting alone to sit with you. It's reaching out to the person who is kind of like off in the corner doing their own thing and checking in on how their day is. Because just that amount of human connection can change someone's day, can change the course of their life, can turn things around. So I'm really curious because, Rachel, I'm sure that the kinds of objections that Tom is talking about, the things that we face internally when we say, like, what is one more check going to do? What is one more knock on the door going to do? What is one more letter going to do? You probably hear that from people who've become disengaged, people who've become disillusioned. What do you say to them? How do you inspire them?
I was going to say it's really about what do I say to myself. And something Tom said resonated with me really earlier, so I want to go back to that for a second because I think it connects, which is coming from an academic background. It's very easy to think I know it all and that I know what's right. And I am continually surprised by what people have to say when I talk to them. And I'm not always pleasantly surprised. I have found, for example, in this canvassing project at the moment, we've gone around to registered Democrats, partly because there's a Democratic primary today. Did I mention? Did I vote? But so therefore we have something to say to them. We come and we say there is a primary. Here is the information on the candidates, but also because we think that this is the most likely. This is going to be our friends, right? These are the people most likely to agree with us. What I have learned is that you can tell very little about a person's actual beliefs from their party label. And so sometimes I've been surprised and honestly sometimes dismayed by what people have to say to me. I find that we profoundly disagree. And what I have had to tell myself is that I'm learning something. That as long as the conversation happens, and as long as the conversation is friendly, which it is, I've even had friendly conversations where somebody has said, "Man, am I still a registered Democrat? I didn't mean to do that. I love Donald Trump." And I say, "This is your lucky day. Here's a voter registration form. You can change your party registration." Even then, it's a friendly conversation. Even then, I know who that person is, and that I have to keep saying, there is value in the connection. There's value in the contact.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and thinking about that, that's why I got involved in local politics, because I started to hear friends and neighbors sort of saying things about each other, mirroring and reflecting the really conflictual national discussion. And if nothing else, when they see me at their door, they're going to know me as the guy who lives in the neighborhood. And I'm a Democrat, and I'm not that bad. I keep my lawn picked up, and and I do those kinds of things. And And I think there's real power and value to making those connections with people so that we remember, oh yeah, there's politics and it's divisive, but there's a place for it, and we're neighbors first. And if we can have those conversations, then we can find areas of agreement.
I want to piggyback on that and just say I ran for local office too and did much better than I thought I'd ever do. And I had the experience of sometimes going to people's doors, and they were not of my party, they were not people likely to vote for me, and I said, I came to ask for your vote, and they said, sure. And I said, really? And they would say, well, yeah, because you asked me.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to be asked. Nobody had ever knocked on their door before.
Right.
So I think my dream is a revolution by way of door knocking and face-to-face contact.
It's so interesting because you all know I'm in the world of social marketing, and part of what I do is a function of sales, right? And there's so many stories and statistics out there about how it all happens, but a couple of things that you touched on are so intriguing. So one is that, one of the number one reasons why people don't come into business with someone like me or buy my product is because they were never asked, right? So same principle. But also the other thing is that most people require like 5 to 12 connections before a real relationship is established, right? And people do business with people they know, like, and trust. So without that, it doesn't go anywhere. And most of the people in my field, by way of some of these statistics, show that, they don't go beyond the first exposure, right? And so it's that continual building of relationships that is across the board, doesn't matter what we're doing, that makes the difference, that establishment of that connection. So I have to ask a question, because this is me going back to the student, and I think, I love the idea, Tom, that we're always students, right? And Rachel, when you were talking about being an academic and feeling like you know everything, and then all of a sudden you're learning so much, right? It's like we're always students if we remain open to it, right? And for me in my life, even and especially adversity has been one of the greatest teachers, as long as I remain open to it. But the thing that I want to go back to is, Tom, when we were working on some of our research and writing at Binghamton University, we were working a lot on democratic governance and the idea of what that concept looked like in higher education administration, what it looked like in the community. And so you also mentioned that when you were younger, you really had this like drive and desire to study and know the little d democracy. And so that's what I want to know from both of you, because you both have this spirit of democracy. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to you?
Well, I think that there are, I think it was March and Olson who wrote this book, where they talked about two different approaches to democracy. And one is aggregation, where we have conflict. Well, how do we solve it? We take a vote. And then we count up the votes, and the winning side gets to decide what happens. And that's really what drives a lot of our discussion about democracy. But then there's another side of democracy, which is about persuasion and discussion and deliberation, and where people come together and hash out problems. And that's a town hall rather than a vote, where someone says, well, what if we try doing it this way, and persuades other people in the room that is a reasonable direction to go. And so that approach to democracy requires a really different way of thinking about what it is that we're doing, And so it's, Rachel, it's your whole idea about knocking on doors and talking to people and listening to what they have to say, because those are where the good ideas might be coming from, rather than saying, well, winner take all, let's vote on Tuesday, and then we'll go back to watching baseball until the next election. It demands more of citizens. It demands a lot more of citizens. But it's also it's fun and engaging and exciting, and it is where you learn when you're doing that work. You know, so many people talk about government and democracy like eat your spinach. You know, it's just and some of the most wonderful people that you will know are people who are engaged in politics, because they care about their communities, they care about solving problems, and they want to do things to make them better. And often that happens across the spectrum politically of where people stand in their ideologies.
Rachel?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think I'm of the school that's, democracy is a terrible system except for all the others. But that actually is a deeper statement than you think. I mean, I think to really support democracy, you really need to put your faith in people, which can be hard at times. And then you have to work to make people, to try to get people to be worthy of that faith. And I think there's two sides to that. I mean, look, there are parts of this country where people can't even vote. We have a big voting rights and voter suppression problem in this country. And then we have the opposite problem, that people don't think that their vote matters, or they don't bother, or they don't treat their vote as something that they should feel some responsibility about. I've run into people who are embarrassed to vote. When I come to the door there, they basically say, I don't really deserve to vote because I haven't been following it. So I guess it's not so much embarrassed to vote, but feel not worthy of the vote. And so I think there are a whole lot of issues. There is an issue of voting rights. There's also an issue of empowering people to feel competent to vote, and helping people see that they're part of something. We use the phrase now, blue wave, like we're all going to be part of this blue wave that's going to... and it's whether you're part of that blue wave or not. I think it's an issue of seeing yourself as exercising power in connection with a whole bunch of other people who you don't even know, and having faith that will happen.
Yeah.
But I feel I have to believe in democracy and then kind of work to make it work, because the alternative's real scary.
Right.
I mean, what are we going to have, a benevolent dictatorship?
Right. Well, and some of the hope that I have for the future lies in programs like First Amendment, First Vote.
Yes.
Right? So we've got this incredible program for young girls, started by Melissa Killeleagh. She's been on one of our previous podcasts. And First Amendment, First Vote is all about young women coming together and learning what it means to be engaged, right? Learning what the principles and practice of civic engagement looks like. And so often the conversations that we were having, so this past year, 50 young girls came through that program between here and Buffalo. And I kept hearing exactly what you talked about before, Rachel, which is like, we don't know what to do. We want to do something, but we don't know what to do, right? And so part of the process is offering the possibilities. It's the same thing that happened to me when I sat down with those two investigators, and they gave me this list of like, well, here's all the things you could do. But it goes even beyond that, to the point of like, sometimes there has to be a little bit of hand-holding to get people to the table, literally. But then the other part of the program is really not only to get them involved in civic engagement, but to really begin to see and identify themselves as future leaders in our country, whether it's at the local level, state level, national, whatever it might be. And it was really so exciting, and just gave me so much hope to hear a 16-year-old girl say, I will be president one day. And to hear another young woman in the group say, I really want to start volunteering in my community so that people know who I am, so that when I am older and I run for office, they'll remember me, right? It's like all the wheels start turning. And it brought a lot of different voices to the table. The other thing that also gives me hope is the program that you and I will be involved in this fall, which is Women Elect WEPAC, program that is designed to bring more women into politics. So I'll share more on that another time, because I'm hoping that we will have the woman who is in charge of the local chapter here to chat with us. But there is so much out there to inspire, to assist, to get people engaged. What are some of the best ways that the two of you would recommend if you were sitting down with somebody in your area and they were saying, look, I really want to do something, I want to be involved? Like, what are some of the immediate ways? Oh my gosh, sorry. What are some of the immediate ways that, that people can help and be part of the community?
Well, I've been a member of the Board of Trustees in the Village of Dryden for just a little over a year, and I can think of two examples. The first one is how I got involved in the Village of Dryden. One of the first things I did is there was a big fundraiser for a new playground in our park, and this is one of those huge, fancy playgrounds with, and the people in the community raised $80,000, which is a lot of money in a community of 2,000 to build this playground. And then for a week, they all, there were always about 50 to 100 people building this playground. And so it was this massive community effort. And it was so cool to be a part of that, because the high school kids raised money for the backstops for the basketball courts, and it was just a targeted, focused focal point where people could see something tangible happen. And I think when people aren't involved, that's really important. That it's not. The first involvement in politics and in engagement is not something esoteric and distant, but where they can actually say, look at what happened.
Right.
The second example is related to that. We have a residential school program in our area, and I got a letter from students in this class, and in it they also had a video. And what they did is they went to the park after the playground was built, and they put little flags everywhere where they found a cigarette butt. And the park was filled with these little flags. And they said, can't you make the park smoke free? And I said, well, why not? I didn't know what it was involved in changing local law, but I got started in that process. And about 2 or 3 months later, we changed our local law to make all village property tobacco free. And it was so cool to be able to say to these students, these young people who were totally powerless. I mean, they were wards of the state in this institution. Yes, we heard you, and we responded, and we did this. How cool is that?
Right.
To be able to do something like that. And I think if we look for those kinds of opportunities, and support people when they say, well, I want to try this, then who knows where it might go.
Yeah, and I love that what you're talking about right now, between the examples of involvement and how it impacts especially the young people, and then the idea about democracy. It takes me back to my favorite John Dewey quote, children are always learning more than what we're teaching them at the time, and what they're learning in those moments is that somebody is listening, and that their voice does matter, and that action can be taken. So even though, like you said, that might not be like the big big move that they're making, like that connection is what begins to create that thread that they can create change, right? Rachel, what about you? What are some examples?
Okay, well, I'm going to take this from two directions. One is, I think there are really fantastic groups working in this community, and I hope you have them on your show. I've been really impressed and moved by the ways that some people have come together around issues of mental health and suicide. I think the United Way has spearheaded some of that, and I know that there have been that kind of town hallish conversations going on. I've also been really impressed at the bipartisan way in which people came together around the threat of an incinerator being built in Romulus, which gave me great hope that it wasn't about Republican and Democrat. It was about the fact that we all live here. Mm-hmm. But from my perspective, I want to say that the 2018 national election is really important. And if you care about whether Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare will continue to exist, if you care about whether the DACA kids, people brought to this country illegally as children and who have grown up here are going to continue to be threatened with deportation because their status is uncertain. If you care what is going on at the border with the separation of children and families, if you care that the rich seem to be getting richer and the poor seem to be getting poorer and the middle class is also getting poorer, I could go on, right? If you care that public funding for public education is being gutted, then I would like to make a pitch that you actually get involved in national electoral politics. And I know that they do feel more abstract, but they have an impact on your life and the life of people you love. So not just get out and vote in the primary if you can, but join us, join a campaign, join us in our door knocking. The other thing I also wanted to mention is on the issue of immigration, which I think has really shocked, depressed, galvanized people. Saturday, June 30th, this Saturday is a national day of action, and there are rallies all around the country, including in Geneva, including in Geneva, New York.
Beautiful.
On the lakefront from 10 to 12. What's really cool about it is that it's the issues that people will be talking about certainly do involve policies down at the border, but they also involve things that are happening right here in New York State. For example, I learned one of the groups involved is doing a campaign to try to make it possible for people to get driver's licenses whether they're documented or not. This is really important to the quality of life of people who live here, including people who live on farms. But frankly, it's important to the safety of anybody who drives on the road, because people who don't get licenses still drive, and if they have an accident, they don't have insurance. And if you are in that accident, their insurance is not going to pay for you.
Right.
So there are issues about driving. There are issues about some of the problems our economy is having because people can't work in the way that they had been working on local farms. So I would really like to plug this rally in Geneva Saturday morning starting at 10 o'clock on the lakefront, not just to turn up and show your humanity if you care about, if that's what you want to do, but also to learn and connect to some other groups that are doing very constructive work in this area.
Excellent.
I just real quickly, what you're talking about, that connection between the local rallies and learning about those issues and national politics is really an important one. Yeah. And Melissa, you were talking earlier about social capital, and since Putnam wrote his book, there has been a lot of research about the resilience of communities, and communities in particular after disasters, which ones recover and are able to restore their community to where it was before the disaster, and which ones really struggle with that. And those that have dense community social networks are much more likely to be able to recover than those that don't. Yeah. And so with active churches, active service clubs, active social clubs, active politics, active schools, all the people that are engaged in those things know each other and can rely on each other when the chips are down. And they build those connections from going to the rallies and meeting each other, and having loose ties with people all over the community rather than just really tight ties with a few people. So all of this is part of the same story, which is to be engaged and to be open to possibilities and listen and learn from each other.
Absolutely. And I just have to say, stepping back for a moment. I love when things just unfold in a way that you just do my job for me. So some of the other things that we talk about on this show are being out and about in the community, different things that are going on. So people have some, suggestions for where they could be this weekend, for example, and ideas and inspiration, which, you've already given, right? You've already given. And Tom, I tie what you were just talking about back to my own personal experience, which is, in this community of Seneca Falls, as a single parent, with my son, here kind of feeling like, oh my gosh, completely overwhelmed. There's such an incredible community, and the more that I plugged in and showed up to anything, the better I felt in life in general. So I urge even the people who are watching who don't know that they necessarily want to be involved with anything to show up at events like this for that very reason. It's just like that level of connection, the level of support that you feel when you can actually identify a friendly face in the crowd, right? So I want to thank you both. I'm going to wrap up with one final question, because I know I took us on a detour, and I promised you that I wouldn't surprise you with any questions that you didn't already know. But this is one that we talked about, and I asked you to think about, because I love to ask people this on my show, which is, what is the legacy that you intend to leave? And I'd love for both of you to answer that, because I think some of the other things that I love to really get at when it comes to the people who come on the show, the people I consider to be my everyday heroes, I like to get at things like passion and purpose and, and what brought you to your work. And you have both already shared that, even without necessarily knowing, a full biography of your life and all of the dates and details. We see and hear and feel it, right, through the ideas and experiences you've shared. So that takes us to this final question, which is, what is your legacy? What is the legacy that you want to leave?
I think I'd like for more people to be willing to engage in politics and not be afraid of it. And that means I'd like to see more people running for office. I'd like to see more women and young people in particular running for office. I'd like to see political discussion be something that can happen at the dinner table.
That sounds like a movement to me.
That's it. Make political discussion delicious again.
Love it.
I'm glad you started, Rachel, because I've been thinking about this question for a couple of days. But for me, the legacy that I want to leave is an understanding that we can build better institutions, and that our institutions of higher education, that I think, and this is a whole nother hour of talking about the kinds of pressures that our universities are both under and are applying in corporatizing and quantifying educational opportunities and activities. But that when we are really actively engaging in education in a meaningful way, it opens up our creativity, it opens up our ability to solve problems. And for me, I want to be a vehicle for that. I want to be a place where people can see that messy, complicated process turn into something worthwhile in their lives and in their communities. So I try and teach that by doing it, and by teaching my students to be comfortable with ambiguity, because that's where creativity happens. If I accomplish that, then I'm happy. And that's one of the things that I've been very happy about, is that you were one of my first students at Binghamton University, and you've been living that dream, and I'm grateful for being a part of it.
Thank you. I'm grateful too. And the process you're talking about always takes me back to the lotus, right? Which is, you've got to be willing to muck around in the mud and feel it and experience it for that incredible flower to blossom, to bloom. So my last quote I would love to leave everyone with, which I feel is so appropriate because it applies to the work that you're doing, Rachel, it applies to the work you're doing, Tom, but also a shared experience, which was in my commencement speech at Binghamton in 2004. And it's Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small, thoughtful group of citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And here's what I want to leave our viewers with. Even if you are one, even if you are a team of one right now, if there is something in your heart that is calling you, get out and do it, because that team of one will find another team of one, and you will continue to grow, because it's the things that are planted within us that we have to go out and pursue, and that is how community is created. So we're going to wrap up for today. I want to thank you both for coming on the show. It's been so fantastic having you here, and we'll leave you with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.